So many of you know this, some of you may not know that, but my first iteration of a career after Steve and I got married was I was going to be a psychologist. And so that means that I went through all of the hoops to be a psychologist until I got to the PhD level, and I decided, well, I'd rather be a minister, you know, because I don't really separate the spirit from the psychology of us all. I can't do that. If your spirit is sick, your brain, your mind is sick. If your mind is sick, your spirit is sick. I just can't separate it, and I felt more of a call to go towards ministry rather than work with lab rats and then have to tell people how they were like lab rats. But I loved psychology. I loved that field of study. I just ate it up. And there's a book, and I don't know because I've been removed from it so far now, but I think it's number 5. There's a book that's called The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that we all work out of. It's about that thick, and it tells you every single solitary thing that you can see that is wrong with someone. Now, what I don't want you to do is ever pick up that book without a psychologist beside you, because you will be sure that you have something wrong with you by looking at all of the diagnostic criteria for mental disorders. And so one of the things that I loved the most in the psychology field was diagnostics. I love diagnostics. And diagnostics is where you talk with a person and then you spend the time filtering out of what they've said exactly what is wrong with them, right? And I was good at diagnosing. I was a good diagnostician, and I seem to be always attracted to those who have personality disorders, right? But as you go through the process of being in the psychological field, one of the things that you have to do is you have to have your own therapy. And let me tell you something, if you ever need to go see a therapist, the number one question you need to ask them is this: have you had your own therapy, and what was it like? Because if they say, no, I didn't need that, then turn and go and find yourself a different doctor, right? Because psychologists who do not have their own therapy are like pastors who do not go through their own confessional. You know, you need to know that they're really willing to look into their own hearts and see what was going on. So during that process, my supervisory psychologist, who was doing that with me, kept saying to me, you are not going to find yourself in the DSM. You're just not going to find yourself there, Jana. I'm like, well, look, I can show you. I have major depressive episodes. He's like, you're not going to find yourself. I have bipolar disorder. You're not going to find yourself. I have this disorder. I kept throwing out all these disorders because one of the things we had to do was be able to be willing to diagnose ourselves, right? To be able to look in the mirror and know who we truly are. And he said, you're not going to be able to find yourself in that book, Jana, because you suffer from SSD. So what did I do? I had to go home and start going through the book. What is SSD? What is SSD? What is it? And I tried to find every disorder I possibly could in the book that said SSD on it. And he took me through the rest of my understanding of therapy without saying anything more about that, even when I would say, now come on, tell me what SSD is. What do you think I have? And he would be just saying, you'll figure it out. Ever been to a therapy situation where you ask the question and they ask you the question back? That's about you figuring it out, right? And so finally, on the very last day, I said to him, please, I have searched these diagnostic criteria. I have tried to figure out what it is you tell me that I'm suffering from. It is not in this book. Can you please tell me what it is? And he said, you have what I call SSD, striving sickness disorder. And I'm like, oh, because, you know, they don't talk to you about that. They especially don't talk to you about that in graduate school, where they're telling you, you have to be number one or you're not going to get the next scholarship to go forward. If you don't have a 4.0 and have all of this list of stuff that you have done extracurricularly, they're not going to accept you into postgraduate school for your PhD. And he said to me, you have striving sickness disorder. It took me a very long time, and I still struggle with striving sickness disorder to figure out what that is about. Because very much like James and John, I want to know that you like me and that I am seen as being very good at what I do and that you will give me the number one line leader place in line, because that place proves that I'm doing the best that I possibly can be. I have been totally indoctrinated by our societal value of being number one, you see. We're number one. You know that cheer that they teach you in high school? We're number one. We're number one. I admit fully in front of you that I have been totally indoctrinated into that societal value. I like feeling like I have that power. I like feeling like I have that position. Other people might call it the top dog. You're the top dog. I had a minister say to me one time, Jana, the only thing wrong with you is that you don't want to sit in the second chair. You want the big chair. Right? All of that language. I do want the big chair. And I've convinced myself, like I think James and John convinced themselves, that I deserve that. So yes, I still suffer with SSD, and my life is unmanageable when I let it get a hold of me. But I'm not the only one. Right? This story of James and John, I think, is so powerful because we can readily see ourselves in there saying to Jesus, I want to be your number one lieutenant. I want to be the one who's out there in your name going and doing. And Jesus says to us, you have a little SSD. You have a little striving sickness disorder. Like he said to James and John, you have a little striving sickness disorder. Can you do what I'm asking you to do? He's saying to them, can you die like I'm going to die? He's saying to them, can you serve rather than be served? Any of us here know folks that like to serve everywhere because it makes them feel good? Striving sickness disorder. Sometimes we only serve in the church because we want to feel good about ourselves rather than being the humble servants that sit beside the person in need. I like this story of James and John. I even like the one from Matthew, the story of James and John, because not only does Matthew want us to know that James and John want to know that they're number one, Matthew writes it as their mother wants to know that they're going to be number one, right? We call those in our vernacular stage moms, right? Or like I was, baseball mom, right? We know this story because we see it around us every single day. We participate in it every single day. What do you think road rage is? Simply, road rage is, I'm going to be the first car in line. What do we think Black Friday is? Huh? Anybody ever been crushed in a Black Friday crush? Yeah. Because I'm going to be the first one to get those bargains, and boy, I got to race through those aisles of those stores to get to that $5 DVD set. Striving sickness disorder. The problem with our striving sickness disorder, not only in our individual selves, but in our communal selves, is it starts to poison us in a way that we begin to live our lives like we have the answers that everybody else needs. Like our desire is to show everybody else, if they would just do it our way, then they might be okay too. You see, striving sickness disorder comes from that place deep down inside of us where we don't think we are enough. And I've talked about this many times, but still we have this gospel lesson that convicts us to look at ourselves and see where that message is having us be out of the kingdom of God. I would tell you that this is one of the hardest possible things if you are afflicted with it. And let's all just not raise our hands, but think in our minds, am I afflicted with this? This is one of the hardest possible spiritual conditions that we have to let go of in our lives. Because when we are afflicted with striving sickness disorder, we are lacking the humility it takes to let go of being number one in this world. We're told every single day that if we're not number one, we are the last there is. Anybody ever hear a coach say to children when they're in the baseball or basketball field, there is no second, there is only number one? Or if you're second, you might as well be last. And I'm not saying that I have anything against competition. I think that we need to have those times in our lives when we are trying to reach the next goal. I'm not saying that competition is bad. What I'm saying is that our attitude around competition gets us in trouble. And when we get to that place where it's getting us in trouble, there are an awful lot of people who are in need who get left behind. You ever known a pastor who wants to have the biggest, the best, the brightest congregation? I will be very honest with you, and I will tell you that I know pastors who will not lead small churches because they're not big enough. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough desire and enthusiasm to go out and change the world. Can I just tell you, that's a bunch of bunk? Because this congregation has more spirit and enthusiasm than the congregation I used to serve that had 850 people in it. But you see, we buy into, as James and John bought into, this idea that being first is always better than being last. But you know, a lot of those folks that are last, they're really nice people. I've known homeless people that are sometimes more giving than the folks who have lots and lots to give. I've seen a homeless woman take the coat off of her back and give it to another homeless person who had no coat. And I've seen people who have 25 coats hanging in their closet take the rattiest one out to give to those who have no coat. You see, this idea that we're first leaves us in this place where our deservedness takes more precedence in our lives than our fact of being equal children of God. Our deservedness. We've worked hard for it. We deserve it. Makes us forget that Christ asks of us the same thing he asks of James and John. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? In other words, can you die to those things inside of you that prevent you from serving one another? That's always a good question in Lent, isn't it? To ask ourselves, can we die to those things that are preventing us from being humble servants? I think maybe that might be one of the reasons why one of the stories of Lent that we always try to make sure we tell everybody during Holy Week is the foot washing story. And we've talked about the foot washing story before, about how Jesus asked us to sit at the feet of those whom we may think are less than we are. But I would submit to all of us, myself even, that bright, shiny stuff of being number one in this world, that bright, shiny power position of being number one in this world is so enticing, it is so tempting, that to even ask ourselves the question, are we forgetting people? Are we not willing to let go of our deservedness? That those questions get lost because being number one is bright and pretty and shiny. We like that power. But are we willing to let it go so that those who are not so powerful, they themselves might feel some measure of power? These are tough questions, I realize, because I live with these questions every day. It might not seem like it sometimes, but sometimes it is very difficult for me to not do what I want to do when I want to do it. I just had this conversation with my spiritual director 3 days ago, and I was telling her how the council that we have right now basically says to me, that's not what you're supposed to, we'll do it. We'll do it. And I'm like, what? What do you mean I don't have to fix everything? What do you mean I don't have to bring the coffee to the meeting? What do you mean I don't have to stop and get the donuts? What do you mean I can stay home while you all are doing it? You see, my striving sickness disorder makes me want to be number one in every single solitary situation. And it's a very, very hard thing to let go of. So our Lenten question, our Lenten challenge is to ask ourselves, can we let go of it? Can we let go of just being number one? Can we not buy any more of those fingers, number one finger, foam fingers that we wave in the air? And we do that symbolically, whether we know that or not. We wave our foam number one fingers in the air every time we have to have the best new car, or we have to have the best new outfit, or we have to go to the best new program. We're waving that we're number one. Look, I can do this. I can have this. I can be this. And Jesus would say, but who have you fed today? Who have you lifted up? You're so busy raising your hand in the air that I'm number one, I'm number one. You can't lift up, you see. You can't give the hand up. Jesus would say, who have you served today? Who have you gone to and asked them, do you need something? How can I help you? I would submit that SSD is what's really harming us more than anything else as the people of God. So our challenge is, can we let go of this stuff? Can we let go of being number one to be able to follow the one who's going to ask us to die? Amen.